my backyard is one of my favorite phrases. And actually, it's the title of a project that I heard about 2 years ago, run by by a group of collaborating scientists and engineers. But what I like about the phrase is it really makes me feel like the deep sea is part of my immediate surrounding. And for a lot of us, it is. 95% of our ocean remains unexplored, and most of this is in the deep ocean. It is said that we have better maps of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. Our lives revolve around the top 200 meters of our oceans, having direct interaction with the biodiversity that inhabits this area. If you're an avid swimmer, snorkeler, or diver, you may have experienced the wonders of our oceans from 10 to 30 meters, where there are lots of hard corals and lots of colorful fish and a lot of light. But as you go further down to 60 or 120 meters, that landscape changes and it goes from hard corals to fan corals. And you can start seeing that the light dissipates. Going further down to the twilight zone between 200 and 1,000 meters, and that changes completely. Almost comparable to the structure of the moon, or at least what I would imagine the moon would look like. And if you dive further down to full ocean depth, there's no light. On the abyssal plain, the pressure is high and the temperatures are low. The topography of the deep sea might not be very different to what we're used to seeing on land. There are gorges and canyons and open plains and underwater mountains. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on 3 deep sea features. The first is the hydrothermal vents. Hydrothermal vents are like hot springs at the bottom of the ocean. This happens when seawater circulates through very hot volcanic rock. The heated solution seeping out of the crust is warmer than that of its surroundings. This causes mineral deposits to occur. Well-adapted species live here, species that use the chemicals such as sulfur to produce food. This is called chemosynthesis. These vents can be extinct, as in this case, or active when you see like smoke plumes coming out. Another feature is seamounts. Seamounts are like underwater mountains and are known to be rich in biodiversity. Seamounts sustain life both in the deep and on the surface. These mountains are formed over hundreds of years through the action of volcanic eruption. And lastly, the large abyssal plains is a large soft-bottomed area, and it's believed that sediment from the land filters through the ocean all the way to the bottom of the sea, creating a thick layer of old sediment that supports life. The deep sea can't be an easy place to live, with high pressures, cold temperatures, and warm temperatures in some of the hydrothermal vents. The species that live here are specially adapted to be able to survive. Whether it's sponges that filter feed,
or as we can see in this image, jellyfish that have special adaptations to be in the deep sea.
or whether it's the symbiotic relationships that form on the hydrothermal vents. What is interesting is that even the fish are weird down here. There are lots of fish that have very low metabolisms, which means they wouldn't have to feed very often. Very strange looking fish in some instances. And what really gets me excited is that wherever you go in the sea, there's always a shark somewhere. But there are also some really cool adaptations like sea cucumbers that can now sail, or this very cute ghost shark. I could stare at him all day, or her, or it. And of course, who can resist the very cute um, Dumbo octopus? Apart from the biodiversity that's found within these areas and the special adaptations that they have to have, these areas, such as hydrothermal vents, um, abyssal plains, and seamounts, are really important locations for minerals and mineral exploitation. The minerals and metals that we talk about here refer to cobalt, gold, silver, copper, zinc, and manganese. We use these in our touchscreen devices, such as our telephones, our mobile phones, or in rechargeable batteries. And some minerals, such as zinc, is used in paint or as a dietary substitution. But before we get down and dirty with the metals, I would like to take some time to explain the map. So, firstly, the exclusive economic zone, which is shown in white, refers to 200 nautical miles that is under jurisdiction of a coastal state. This means that that coastal state has full control over how the waters are exploited. The light blue areas, so basically the background, is therefore areas outside of the control of those states. This is called the areas beyond national jurisdiction, or the ABNJ, and essentially it belongs to everybody and nobody. There are also three reference to there are also reference to three mining targets, and these you can see as dark blue, which is the polymetallic nodules, which we find at on abyssal plains. There's the dark orange spots that are the polymetallic sulfides, which we find at hydrothermal vents. And of course, we have the cobalt rich crusts found on seamounts. So if you have a look at the map, you'll notice that a lot of the orange, yellow, and dark blue are found in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Therefore, in theory, everyone has a claim over it. However, an independent body manages the mining grounds on the high seas, and this is called the International Seabed Authority. The ISA has allocated specific areas of exploratory mining, allowing 30 mining contractors to explore these areas. A lot of the exploration is actually happening within the Clarion-Clipperton fracture zone, so where on the abyssal plains, where they are looking at the possibility of polymetallic nodules exploitation. On the abyssal plains, where they are looking at the possibility of polymetallic nodules exploitation. So perhaps the most popular of the three, and the mineral that has a little more research than uh, minerals found on hydrothermal vents or in the crust on seamounts are the nodules on the abyssal plain. These manganese nodules form over millions of years in some cases and look a bit like potatoes and have lots of layers that has built up through the years, and they contain manganese, cobalt, and iron in some cases as well as some other metals. One of the studies conducted looked at the effect of removing polymetallic nodules from the abyssal zone and what that would mean for the organisms that live within that area. So this research took place within the Clarion-Clipperton zone, and this is an area where mining exploration is allowed. And this is managed, like I said before, by the ISA. So each of these colors represent a different contractor that are allowed to investigate and explore the possibility of mining within this region. So when we look at what the aim and objective of the study was, they wanted to investigate an area of high density polymetallic nodules in an area of that's high density and an area of low density polymetallic nodules to understand whether the type of species and the number of species found in these two habitats would greatly differ. So what was clear from the results is that sessile organisms, so organisms that kind of stay in one place, such as sponges or certain types of corals, were more abundant. So there were a lot more individuals in an area where nodules were present. On the other hand, if there were no nodules, there were a lot less individuals. You can also see that each color represents a different type of organism, and that changed between sites as well. For example, if we look at BGR, where there is nodules, we had a lot of allisionaceae, whereas in an area of no nodules, there were none of those recorded. And the same applied to mobile fauna, so fauna that can move, such as sea cucumbers or sea stars and sea urchins. The same trend was seen in the sense that areas where there were nodules, there were a lot more individuals than areas where there were no nodules. So now that we've learned a little bit more about the polymetallic nodules found on abyssal plains, we'll spend just a couple of minutes looking at polymetallic sulfides found in hydrothermal vents and cobalt-rich crusts, which are found on seamounts. So we know that seamounts are covered in some seamounts are covered in cobalt-rich crusts. These take a very long time to deposit and grow. This crust is attached to the rocks, and generally, as previously stated, seamounts are considered an oasis. Removing the crust layer would generally mean loss of a lot of biodiversity. And these areas are actually already being exploited through our fishing practices, for example. So one of the studies looked at seamounts within the Hawaiian region, and they wanted to compare the benthos, so the species that live on cobalt-rich crusts, and species that live on seamounts that are not as rich in cobalt. And the main conclusions from this was that there were differences, that benthic assemblages of invertebrates were structurally different between seamounts located inside and outside a region of cobalt-rich crusts. So generally there were more assemblages of invertebrates on these cobalt-rich crusts in comparison to the cobalt-poor crusts. But the main, I think, effects, shall we say, of mining on these really old structures is the loss of long-lived functional groups such as corals, and when we are stripping a seamount, it means we remove the whole crust, so it will hinder recovery of this area. And we actually don't know how different seamounts are from one another. So a lot more studies need to be done to inform what it means when we mine on seamounts. So I think the last habitat we're looking at are hydrothermal vents, which are really contentious habitats. Like I said previously, they're mining will be done for copper, gold, and an assortment of other metals. Um, but the worry around these particular habitats is that some of them are constantly changing, um, such as active hydrothermal vents, whereas the inactive hydrothermal vents have taken a long time to build up and become the structures that they are. So really, it comes down to the fact that, again, like a lot of the other habitats, there aren't a lot of studies pointing to the importance and the effect of mining on these particular habitats. So I think the last habitat we're looking at are hydrothermal vents, which are really contentious habitats. Like I said previously, their mining will be done for copper, gold, and an assortment of other metals. Um, but the worry around these particular habitats is that some of them are constantly changing, um, such as active hydrothermal vents, whereas the inactive hydrothermal vents have taken a long time to build up and become the structures that they are. So really, it comes down to the fact that, again, like a lot of the other habitats, there aren't a lot of studies pointing to is that we do not know enough about our backyard, our oceanic backyard, the deep sea. And this is true especially within an African context, as very few researchers work within the abyssal zones, and there isn't necessarily the capacity within the continent and within the island states to carry out large-scale expeditions to the deep. But why should we care? The first time that I interacted actively with the tip, the beginning of the deep sea, was last year when I had the immense privilege to go into a submersible down to 250 meters as part of the Necton first descent. And one of the things that I realized at that point is that the deep sea really is our backyard and we are connected to it.